You're watching Alert 360 News, the channel that cuts through the noise and gives you the truth from every angle. Stay alert, stay informed, and hit that subscribe button so you never miss a major update.
Reached its lowest point since 1962. I'm Clinton Griffiths. While that may be good news when it comes to producer profits, it could be an issue in the long term. Ag Day's Michelle Rook joins me. Michelle, why are producers more hesitant to retain heifers right now?
Clinton, there are a long list of factors causing the slow heifer retention that we're seeing right now, including things like high interest rates and lingering drought. So when the herd rebuild starts is really the million-dollar question for the cattle market right now. However, there are plenty of producers and industry experts that think expansion will continue to be a slow grind for quite some time. The last bull run in the cattle market was in 2015. It was short-lived and followed by a nasty correction. But this cycle is different in part because producers still feel that sting.
I think this is going to be a slower rebuild. I think because of the amount of volatility that we've seen in these cattle markets over the last 10 years, in addition to how the pricing patterns reacted to the last rebuild.
In fact, producers are still trying to heal from 2015 and COVID and are reinvesting profits in infrastructure.
And I think that's a key to our expansion. I think that people are paying off debt.
Producers and experts list several challenges in herd rebuilding, including trade and tariffs. But another is the existential threat of emerging animal diseases like New World screwworm and its impact on demand.
If we lose those trade partners, you're going to take a wonderful cattle market and you're going to see it go down very rapidly.
Producers also cite high land prices and competition for grazing land as limitations for expansion.
This area is very competitive for leasing ground, and getting the ability to grow is really limited by what pastures we can find and buy.
The aging producer base is also an impediment to growth and the lack of succession plans.
We still have a fairly old population. I mean, probably my age or older, and we're still losing some operations that don't have younger generations to come behind them.
And agriculture's also facing the same labor shortages and concerns with immigration reform as the rest of the economy.
There's always the labor issue. That's getting harder and harder in a lot of industries, but especially in agriculture.
The historically tight supplies have also had an impact on feeder and packing plant capacity.
Everybody's scrambling to have enough cattle to put through their packing plant to run efficiently and keep going.
And with cattle numbers so low, it could take more than 2 years to rebuild.
When that cow gets inseminated and gets bred and has a calf, it takes almost 2.5 years for that calf to hit the plate for food, for meat.
For all these reasons, Zimmerman thinks the cow herd rebuild could stretch all the way into the end of this decade. And combined with strong consumer demand, that could bode well for cattle prices for a while. I'm Michelle Rook reporting for Ag Day.
Canada's decision to reject U.S. beef didn't just send a message, it sent a shockwave through the entire global market. What began as a routine trade dispute quickly spiraled into one of the most dramatic agricultural standoffs in recent North American history. Few expected Canada to take such a bold step, and even fewer anticipated the worldwide consequences that would follow. But the ripple effect has now spread far beyond North America, raising questions about global food supply, trade power, and the fragile balance between politics and agriculture. For decades, the United States has dominated beef exports across the Western world, supplying Canada with millions of pounds of meat annually. The two countries have depended on each other for economic stability, supply chain security, and shared agricultural standards. So when Canada abruptly turned away U.S. beef shipments, many believed it had to be a temporary dispute, something that would resolve quietly. Instead, the rejection became the spark that ignited a much larger economic storm. Behind the scenes, Canadian officials had been debating the long-term reliance on American beef for years. Concerns over quality standards, pricing instability, and U.S. policy unpredictability had slowly built into a sense of urgency. The tipping point, however, came when U.S. agricultural guidelines shifted once again, leaving many Canadian producers and consumers feeling exposed to sudden changes outside of their control. Canada decided it was time to draw a line. A firm one. The rejection itself was swift. Several major U.S. beef shipments were halted at the border, redirected, or outright refused. Overnight, Grocery suppliers, restaurant chains, and meat processors across Canada were forced into emergency meetings, not because of panic, but because of opportunity. Canada was ready to take a new direction, one that would reshape its entire domestic beef industry. While Canada celebrated the move as a step toward self-reliance, the United States was caught completely off guard. Ranchers across states like Texas, Kansas, and Nebraska suddenly faced unexpected losses. Many had already been struggling with rising feed costs, drought conditions, and fluctuating market demand. Losing one of their biggest buyers was the blow they absolutely did not need. The U.S. agricultural sector immediately demanded answers. Politicians, trade representatives, and industry leaders scrambled to understand how Canada had reached this decision so quickly and decisively. But behind the confusion was a deeper concern. If Canada could do this, what would stop other nations from reconsidering their reliance on American meat exports as well? Global markets reacted instantly. Beef futures dipped, Asian importers tightened their negotiations with U.S. suppliers, and European buyers began reassessing their contracts. A single decision from Canada had triggered a wave of global caution. World economies don't like uncertainty, and this move created precisely that. Meanwhile, Canadian ranchers found themselves in an unexpected spotlight. Demand for local beef surged almost overnight, giving producers more leverage than they had seen in years. Farmers who once competed with lower-priced U.S. imports suddenly experienced a boom of domestic support. Canadian consumers, fueled by a mix of nationalism and market curiosity, began buying local beef at record rates. This shift didn't come without challenges. Supply chain bottlenecks, limited processing capacity, and rapid price adjustments tested the Canadian market in ways it hadn't prepared for. But the government stood firm, pledging to invest in expanding Canada's agricultural infrastructure. What began as a trade decision evolved into a blueprint for restructuring the entire Canadian beef economy. Across the border, American leaders urged Canada to reconsider. Some warned of retaliatory trade measures. Others accused Canada of destabilizing long-standing partnerships. But Canada held its ground, arguing that national food security and economic independence were far more valuable than maintaining predictability for U.S. exporters. The tension deepened when several South American and European countries expressed interest in filling the supply gap left by the United States. Deals and discussions began forming behind closed doors. Canada's rejection of U.S. beef had opened a new lane for global competition, one that threatened America's dominance in agricultural exports. As the world watched, markets continued to fluctuate. Investors poured money into new beef suppliers. American ranchers pleaded for federal intervention. Canadian producers worked overtime to meet soaring demand. Economists warned that the North American agricultural balance might never return to what it once was. But beyond economics, this event exposed something deeper, an evolving shift in global trust. The United States had long relied on its status as the backbone of international agriculture, but Canada's bold move proved that no position is permanent. Other nations began reevaluating their dependencies and questioning whether it was time to diversify their food sources. The U.S. suddenly found itself in a defensive posture, something that rarely occurs in the agricultural sector. Inside Canada, support for the decision grew stronger each day. Politicians praised the shift as a patriotic victory. Analysts celebrated it as a major economic turning point. And consumers took pride in choosing locally sourced beef. The message being sent to the world was clear. Canada was ready to redefine its agricultural identity. Back in the United States, the mood was very different. Farmers held press conferences, pleading for stability. Meat exporters warned of layoffs. Trade organizations called for emergency negotiations. The federal government found itself under enormous pressure to restore confidence both at home and abroad. What no one expected, however, was how this dispute would become a symbol of changing global power dynamics. It wasn't just about beef anymore, it was about influence, control, independence. Canada had proven that even long-standing economic traditions could be radically altered by a single strategic decision. Months passed, and the market continued to evolve. Canada successfully expanded its local beef processing facilities, reducing its reliance on U.S. imports even further. New trade agreements solidified partnerships with alternative beef suppliers. And Canadian ranchers saw one of the most profitable years in recent history. Meanwhile, the United States faced a difficult reality. Market losses mounted. export numbers drop. Global competitors moved into territories once dominated by American suppliers. What began as a simple rejection had grown into a global reshuffling of economic relationships. By the time negotiations between the two countries restarted, the landscape had changed completely. Canada was no longer a dependent peer, it was a confident power in the beef industry with new alliances, stronger infrastructure, and a renewed sense of autonomy. The United States had no choice but to approach discussions with a different tone. This story didn't end with a clear winner or loser. Instead, it revealed something more significant. The world is changing, trade relationships are shifting, and emerging powers are ready to challenge long-standing economic giants. Canada's bold rejection of U.S. beef became a turning point not just for agriculture, but for global trade itself. A reminder that even the strongest markets can be tested. A signal that nations everywhere are reconsidering who they trust, who they depend on, and who they allow to shape their economic future. And as the world continues to adapt to this new reality, one thing is certain: the global market will never be the same again. Thanks for watching Alert 360 News, where real stories meet real impact. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, smash that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and join the fastest growing news community on YouTube.